Welcome everybody to the webinar. My name is Greg Bridgewater and I'm an executive member of the Quinte chapter of the Ontario Woodlot Association. We surveyed our members late last year and invasive species was a topic that many of you were interested in hearing more about. So thanks to the Ontario Invasive Species Centre, we're presenting this webinar today on invasive insects and pests. And then on May 10th, there's a second presentation on invasive plants and fungi. And we hope to follow up both of these seminars with a woodlot walk in June, and I'll get back to that in a sec. And I also just wanted to mention that the next issue of the Ontario Woodlander is all about invasive species. So coming your way is a lot of information that hopefully will come in handy to you. Regarding the Woodlot walk, I think we're shooting for June 29th or thereabouts. And if you are a woodlot owner in the Quinte chapter area and you have several invasive species on your property, either insects or plants, and you're interested in hosting that walk on the Saturday, then we'd be interested in hearing from you. And our plan would be to have you host, and we'll bring an expert along to have a look and maybe talk about what he would do or they would do in that instance. So if you're interested, you can email us at quintewoodlotassociation@gmail.com. And we also have a newsletter coming out shortly, and we'll put that in there as well, just to let you know. Okay, so today our presenters are Madison Sturba and Vincent Tassa, which he just told me means the tax. So I don't know if that colors any of your impression of them, but anyway, we won't talk about that.
It is tax season.
That's true, right? Maybe you should have had your name the refund or something like that. Like the carbon tax name just got changed, and you could change your last name to something more powerful. Anyway, so
Yeah.
Vincent Madison. Madison is a program development coordinator at the Invasive Species Centre, where she focuses on training and outreach, particularly on forest and agricultural pests. Madison graduated from the University of Windsor with an MSc in biology and an honors BSc in behavior, cognition, and neuroscience. And Vincent is a program development intern at the Invasive Species Centre, where he provides outreach and training support on forest-related pests, including the release of the Oak Wilt Wire quarterly newsletter. I know I get that thing, so it's very informative. Vince is a graduate of the Natural Environment Technologist, Conservation, and Management program from Sioux College and is an executive member of the Sioux Naturalists. So guys, I'll leave it to you to take away.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Greg. That was a great introduction. Vince, maybe if you just start the slides there and we'll get started. Thanks everybody so much for being here. Vince and I are really excited to be joining you today to talk about some invasive forest pests that are threatening your woodlots. Perfect. Thanks, Vince. So you can go to the next slide.
Okay.
So like Greg mentioned, we're from the Invasive Species Centre, and just in case you weren't familiar with us, we're a not-for-profit organization that mobilizes action against invasive species that harm the environment, economy, and society. So we do this in a number of different ways. We have our own granting program, which actually just became live on our website if you're interested. We support on-the-ground action ourselves, like through plant pulls, for example, and we do like lots of different education outreach events like this one. So we are based in Sault Ste. Marie. Vince is there now, but we have staff scattered all throughout the province. Like I myself am coming from Windsor. So just a little overview for the day. I'll be talking about 6 different invasive species: oak wilt, hemlock woolly adelgid, beech leaf disease, emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, and spotted lanternfly. So it looks like a lot, but we'll try our best to be concise and go through them all quickly. They're all just kind of hot topics right now. So we'll kind of give a background on the species, give a status update, and what you can do to help prevent their spread. So I'll kick things off with oak wilt first. I'll talk about oak wilt a little bit more than the other species, just because it is so new to Canada, and I know there's been a lot of interest in how it could potentially be impacting our oaks here. So oak wilt is a vascular disease of oak trees caused by the non-native fungus Brachylia phagocerum. No one knows exactly where it came from or how it got here, but it has been in North America for quite some time, and we do know that it spreads in the xylem of oak trees. So the xylem are the vessels in the vascular tissue that transport water and nutrients through the roots, so it'll transport them up from the roots up towards the canopy. And so this fungus will grow in that xylem, and it basically suffocates the tree. It blocks that transport of water and nutrients. And without these resources, leaves can wilt and drop, and that's basically where the disease gets its name from. So all oaks can become infected with oak wilt, but red oaks are particularly vulnerable and they can die in a single season, sometimes as early as 2 to 6 weeks. It just really depends on the timing of initial infection. And I will say that unfortunately, there is no cure for oak wilt, so red oaks that get infected will die from the disease. So oak wilt has been found in 24 US states, several of which border Ontario. We can see all the different impacted areas and the counties in orange there on the map. The closest known US detection was on Belle Isle, Michigan, which is within 500 meters from Windsor. So for that reason, we really thought Windsor would be the initial site of introduction. But surprisingly, it was actually found for the first time in the city of Niagara Falls last May. And then after that, it was confirmed in the township of Springwater, which is near Barrie, and then the town of Niagara on the Lake. So it kind of just shows that invasive species sometimes don't pop up exactly where you would expect them to. So how do we identify oak wilt? The first sign or symptom that you'll notice are on the leaves. So we'll see this leaf discoloration. It'll start from the leaf edges and then work its way inwards towards that middle line. We'll also tend to see this leaf discoloration happening at the top of the tree canopy first and then working its way downward as the disease progresses. Oak wilt also does result in complete defoliation. So really it'll look like what you'd expect to see in the fall with that natural leaf drop, but it's happening way earlier out of season in June or July. So there are a couple different oak wilt lookalikes, but there's some things we can keep in mind to try and tell the difference between them. So we have oak wilt on the left and some different lookalikes on the right there. We have anthracnose and leaf scorch. These are the ones that I noticed that were pretty prevalent on the landscape last year. I actually took these pictures. So let's kind of go through how we can tell the difference. First, we can look at the individual tree level. So looking at those individual leaves. So comparing oak wilt with anthracnose there, anthracnose is also caused by a fungus, but it causes the leaves to have these irregular brown patches of like bubbly tissue. We can see that leaf is folding in. We won't see that with oak wilt. Oak wilt, it's more faded, but it won't curl, it won't bubble. So you won't have that kind of deformity. Leaf scorch too, you'll see really defined little patches of browning tissue all throughout the leaf, and you won't see that with oak wilt. We can also look at the landscape level. So oak wilt, thankfully, is a slow-moving disease. So if you were to think you have oak wilt on your property, it doesn't automatically mean that all your oak trees in your woodlot are doomed. It's not like emerald ash borer; it doesn't spread that quickly, thankfully. So if you happen to see these types of oak wilt-like symptoms on the landscape, they're all popping up at the same time, they're all spreading rapidly, it's likely to be one of these lookalikes, and trees will typically recover from things like anthracnose and leaf scorch. So that's something to keep in mind. We can also think about leaf retention. So if you see these types of symptoms on the trees and the trees are retaining their leaves all throughout the growing season, it's likely to be one of these lookalikes because like I said, oak wilt does cause complete defoliation. So just start regularly monitoring the health of oak trees, especially as we enter into spring when the leaves start coming out on the trees. Pay attention to if they leaf out. If they start losing leaves really early in June or July, that's a big red flag and those trees should be inspected more closely. So this is what that complete defoliation can look like. Like I said, oak wilt is slow moving, but if it's not caught in time, it can spread throughout the woodlot. So this is a picture with all these dead red oak trees that died from oak wilt. And we can see it's time of year when they should be out flourishing. There's lots of other green, nice trees all around. So we looked at the leaves. How else can we identify oak wilt? Well, we can look at the bark, actually, on the trunks and larger branches. So oak wilt causes these vertical bark cracks from underlying pressure pads, which I'll get into in the next slide. But I wanted to compare it against the normal oak bark because normal oak bark can have these kind of grooves that resemble the oak wilt bark crack. So sometimes it can be hard to tell if you're looking at an oak wilt bark crack. But we have a really great video on our YouTube channel. It's of this gentleman. His name is Philip, and he's from Michigan DNR, and he goes around hunting these pressure pads. And so he takes the back of his axe and he'll tap against the trees, and it actually sounds hollow underneath where the oak wilt bark crack is. So he says that if you can't see the crack, you can hear it. So that's something to keep in mind. So these are the underlying pressure pads and fungal mats that are created that vertical bark crack. And these pictures are actually taken from the initial infection site in the city of Niagara Falls. These are like the first case of oak wilt here in Canada in these pictures. So you can see these fungal mats, they'll develop after the tree has died. So a red oak will die. It'll create these fungal mats underneath the bark, and the pressure pads are where they're forming spores. So when they're making spores, it'll accumulate, kind of push up against the bark with all their outward pressure and create that vertical crack you see in that first picture. And these pressure pads can look different depending on how old they are. So these newer pads, you can tell this is newer because they're white, gray, but they'll darken over time and kind of turn almost all black as the years go on. And I haven't smelt it personally, but I've been told it smells very strongly like juicy fruit gum or like a fermenting wine. Some people have even said banana, so it's kind of personal preference. But if you're walking through your woodlot and you smell this type of strong juicy fruit gum smell and you're not chewing gum, maybe just take a look around your trees and see if you can see these kind of vertical bark cracks. So oak wilt can spread above ground and underground, so we'll go into each of these quickly. So we can go to the next slide. So the first way that it spreads above ground is through nididulid beetles. They're also called sap beetles. And these beetles are attracted to sweet smells like the fruity wine-like odor of those pressure pads or the smell of fresh sap at a new wound site. So these beetles are native. They're just always out in the environment doing their thing. And the idea is that a recently dead red oak tree that has that fungal match, that pressure pad, that vertical bark crack, that beetle will smell that fungus. And they're small, they're only like 6 millimeters in size, so small enough to wiggle their way through the crack, and they'll feed on that fungus like you see in this picture here. And when they're done feeding, those spores will get on their little bodies and they'll leave in search of new food. And if there happens to be an oak tree nearby that was recently wounded, and they smell that sap, they can go to that tree and introduce that fungus. So this is just one of the ways that it spreads above ground. Next slide. So these beetles are why we have pruning periods. So we recommend not to prune oak trees during the growing season between April and October. That's just when these beetles are most active, and it's based on research from the States, primarily through Michigan, just because they've been dealing with it for so long. So if you happen to have to prune an oak tree in this season coming up, maybe it's like a hazard and you have to prune it, or if you notice like a wound from a storm damage, or maybe if you nick the bark if you're weed whacking too closely, any kind of wound that you see, we recommend covering in pruning paint or clear shellac just to prevent the smell from attracting those beetles. But there is a lot of ongoing research, especially in Canada, to really understand beetle emergence and really what times the oaks here are most at risk. So the second way it can spread above ground is through human activity, primarily through the movement of firewood. Very common in the invasive species world is don't move firewood, burn where you buy. Like I said, those pressure pads form under the bark of an oak tree after it's died, so you really don't know what's underneath there. You could be transporting oak wilt to a whole new area if you're not sure. So oak wilts can also spread underground through root grafts. So trees of the same species can fuse their roots underground. So 2 red oaks, 2 white oaks, for example. And this usually is to their advantage. They can share resources and water through their interconnected root system. But it means they can also transport diseases this way as well. And so oak wilt will unfortunately kind of take advantage of the system and move from a infected tree to a healthy tree through their underground roots. And it does remain transmittable through the root grafts for several years, even after the tree has died or has been removed. Next slide. So oak wilt does spread underground. It kind of radiates outward from the infected trees. So we can see in this patch here, this infection zone, the skeletons of those dead trees, and then around it, there's newly infected trees that are now dying. The ones that are yellowing, they're kind of browning. And if this site were to go undetected, it would continue spreading outwards until all those oaks are impacted. So where do we stand with oak wilt now? So all 3 sites were detected within a month or 2 of each other, really close. But the 3 initial trees that were found in the city of Niagara Falls were spore-producing trees, like we saw in that picture with those spore mats. And so they needed to be moved immediately. So they were found in May and removed in June of last year. Since then, there were 6 infected trees that were removed. They were actually moved last month. In the township of Springwater, there was 1 infected tree that was removed in November. And then in the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, there were 9 infected trees that were removed last year in December. So all of the trees that have been confirmed with oak wilt in Canada have been removed. And there has been a lot of ongoing monitoring and surveying, and there have been no additional detections. So far, it's looking really good for oak wilt. We'll kind of see what happens with this new survey season as we enter into the new spring and summer. But hopefully it's a good news story because we're looking good so far with oak wilt. Okay, I'll shift gears here now and talk about Hemlock woolly Adelgid. So Hemlock woolly adelgid is a really tiny aphid-like insect that sucks the sap of hemlock trees. They're extremely hard to see on their own. So what you're actually likely to see are the white ovisacs that they create. So they'll make these white ovisacs. You can find them on the underside of branches at the base of the needles. You're unlikely to really see them if it's a new infestation, like in that top early infestation picture. There's only those two little white ovisacs. If you're just going through your stand, you're not likely to see that. It's like a needle in the haystack. But you're likely to see it more when it's kind of later, more progressed, which we can see at the bottom there. So they're all along the base of the needles. There are those white ovisacs. And the next slide here, we can see that just much more clearly. That's where all their little legs are. Next slide. So this is the distribution of Hemlock woolly adelgid in eastern North America. So we can see the range of native hemlock in that green, and in the States, we can see how much it's spread in that burgundy and yellow color. So it has spread mostly throughout the range of eastern hemlock, and then in Canada, it's been found in Nova Scotia and Ontario. So this is kind of a zoom in timeline of what's been happening in Ontario. So from 2013 to 2021, it was relatively isolated in the Niagara region. But in 2022, that's when we saw a jump. It was a little more concerning. We saw the insect move over into Cobourg, all away from the other detections. It's closer to you guys from where you're tuning in. And likely this is because of bird activity. So birds are a big pathway for Hemlock woolly adelgid, especially in the Niagara region. It's a good stopover site for migratory birds. So they'll come in, if they land on a hemlock tree that's infested, those adelgids, those ovisacs can kind of stick to their feathers. And then if they leave and happen to land on a hemlock tree elsewhere, they can introduce that insect and create a whole new population. And a fun fact is Hemlock woolly adelgid, they're all females. They don't need males to reproduce. So in theory, it only really takes a few little individuals to create entirely new populations. And unfortunately, Hemlock woolly adelgid has been spreading. We can see last year there were 3 new detections in the red there. So how can we find Hemlock woolly adelgid in a woodlot? There are a few different options. So if you're out doing visual surveys where you're just scanning the trees with your eyes as you're walking through, you can use a simple headlamp or flashlight. The adelgid, those ovisacs kind of look a little reflective in the light, so that can be a good tool. You can also just use binoculars or just your eyes in the daytime as well. Ball sampling is another great technique. You can see it in that image there. It's just basically a giant slingshot, and it'll toss the ball up high into the canopy, and that ball has Velcro that'll stick to those ovisacs. And so when the ball is kind of coming back towards the ground and hitting off those branches, it'll collect, the idea is that it'll collect those adelgids, and then you can, detect it that way. And the CFIA has the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has a whole guide that'll tell you exactly how many trees to do this ball sampling on, how many times to do it, how to set up grids, things like that. So there are tools how to do that. Interception traps are another great tool. You can see here is an example of an interception trap in that green there. And the idea is that it's very passive. You just set it up, leave it. And with this one in particular, if there are any adelgids crawling on the leaves, they'll fall down, get stuck to this trap, and then you can look at it under a microscope and detect the insect that way. So this slide is showing another type of interception trap, which you can see in that orange circle disc there. It was a trap developed by Dr. Sherilyn Partridge and Meg Sanders. And it's 3D printed. It has 4 holders for microscope slides, and those slides are dipped in petroleum jelly. And the idea is that this trap is elevated off the ground, and any little Hemlock woolly adelgid insects or parts that are caught in the wind will come and land on this jelly and get trapped. And then it can be looked at under a microscope or analyzed in the lab for eDNA to really detect Hemlock woolly adelgid. So we used these traps last year, and we're using them again this year to really detect Hemlock woolly adelgid. And it's been a great way to detect it in areas where the terrain is difficult or where visual surveys are a little bit more tricky. We use them as part of our Hemlock woolly adelgid monitoring networks, our eDNA program. So we launched this program last year, really in response to all the increased detections. And the point of this program is really to increase detection of Hemlock woolly adelgid outside of the known distribution regulated areas. So we had volunteers set up these traps last year in Ontario. They're setting them up again this year. And it gives people the opportunity to really actively monitor their woodlots. So these are the outcomes of that program. We did have 50 people set up traps last year. We had a range of participants. There wasn't any previous knowledge needed to use these interception traps, so you don't need to know anything about Hemlock, woolly adelgid, or biology to set them up. And it was a really great, successful program. It did lead to increased early detection. We had one trap that was positive for Hemlock, woolly adelgid. And so it did lead to a detection that may have otherwise gone unnoticed if we didn't have that trap out. And that result did make its way onto EdMaps and iNaturalist, which are both reporting tools, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But it really just means that if anybody's on those platforms looking up the insect, they can see that new detection. And this is the detection that was made, the point that we added to the map because of this program. It was found in Haldimand County. So there are a few ways that you can help prevent the spread of Hemlock, woolly adelgid. The first is to simply monitor hemlock health regularly. Pay attention to where the hemlocks are, how their condition changes over time. If you're walking through a hemlock stand, there are a few different phytosanitary measures that you can follow. So make sure you carry a boot brush and a lint roller with you. Those will be your best friends. Really just a good habit in general to get into brushing off your boots. A lot of different invasive species like insects and plant seeds can get caught in the soil and get caught up in your boots and hitchhike with you that way. So we recommend to brush off your boots really well when leaving a stand, lint roll your clothing, your hair, your pets if they came with you into the woodlot, and that'll get any of the adelgids off. And then we also recommend washing your clothes when you leave that stand, especially before entering another stand as well. In terms of management options, once you do have Hemlock, woolly adelgid, there are physical and chemical treatment options available. So you can remove infested trees, for example, or treat them with insecticides. So we have 5 different ones that are registered for use here in Ontario right now. And we have this guide here that you see on the right for managing Hemlock, woolly adelgid. This will be available actually at the end of this month, so in the next week or two, on our website. And this guide really outlines all the different recommendations for how you would handle Hemlock, woolly adelgid, taking into account like the size of the infestation and different factors like that. So this will be a really great tool to use. And then the last thing I'll say here is that biocontrol is another option. It's not available here in Ontario, but it has been used for quite some time now in the States, and Nova Scotia just started their own biocontrol program. But it's not here in Ontario just yet, but hopefully one day we'll see. It's a good thing on the horizon. So the next thing I'll talk about here is beech leaf disease. So beech leaf disease is caused by an invasive nematode. It's foliar feeding. I won't try and pronounce that Latin name, but nematodes are basically just little microscopic animals that look like little worms. You can see the picture of them there. Extremely small, less than 1 millimeter in size, and they can impact all species of beech. So American, European, Chinese, Oriental beech are could all be impacted by the disease. And these nematodes, they feed, they live in the buds, and then when the leaves come out, they'll feed on that leaf tissue between the veins, and it causes decline and mortality of both understory and overstory plants. So beech of all ages can be impacted by beech leaf disease, but mortality typically occurs more so in the younger ones. So this is a map of the distribution of beech leaf disease. We can see in that really light color in Ohio that it first appeared on the landscape here in North America in 2012, and then has spread out since. In Ontario, it was found in 2017 for the first time. That bright orangey red color is the detections as of last year. So it has spread north and south of all the known detections. And then in Ontario, it was found in 4 new counties. So the best way to identify beech leaf disease, the easiest way is to look for these bands, these striping. You'll see them between the veins on the leaves. And the best way to see them is from standing on the ground, looking up when the sun is shining down. It'll really make them quite obvious. And these bands can differ in color, really just depending on the time of year. So they're kind of reddish sometimes at first when the leaves first pop out, and then they can darken over time. In severe cases too, the leaves can change in their texture, so they can become thicker or more leathery. And in these severe cases too, there can be leaf drop and leaf bud development being delayed or aborted, things like that. You will also tend to see these symptoms more so on the lower branches of the trees. So what do we know about beech leaf disease? Unfortunately, not too much, just especially compared to other different types of forest invasives. There is a lot of ongoing research in Canada to better understand its impacts, pathways of spread, and best management practices. So for example, we don't even know if the nematode is the sole cause of the disease. So it's definitely associated with beech leaf disease, but it's unknown if there's maybe other insects or pathogens or something else that's also causing it. So a lot of research going on there. We do know from some research, some of the risk factors. So I cited the study here, but beech leaf disease is thought to occur more often in areas that are closer to water bodies where there's high relative humidity and high nitrogen soil content. That's just a few examples. So there is definitely a theme of these nematodes liking water and moisture. So what can we do? It is hard to give specific recommendations just because there is a lot of unanswered questions with beech leaf disease. Other nematodes can spread through insects or mites or through plant litter. So some general recommendations we can give is to clean off your boots and do not spread beech seedlings, leaf litter, firewood, things like that. So yeah, I wish I could say more about specific management techniques. I was looking at a study in the States that was talking about how maybe pruning the trees and thinning the branches could help let light in, increase air circulation, and help prevent symptom progression year over year. But again, it's preliminary, it's hard to say. So we're good there. All right, I'll pass it over to Vince to talk about emerald ash borer.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Maddie. Hello, everyone. So yeah, so I'm going to start this portion of the presentation here, talking about the emerald ash borer. So the emerald ash borer is a species of wood-boring beetle that originates from Asia. It is believed to have been first introduced in North America through infected wood packaging in the 1990s, where it remained undetected until it was discovered in Detroit and shortly afterwards in Windsor, Ontario in 2002. So it is one of the most damaging invasive insects ever to reach Canada. It targets and attacks all species of ash trees in North America. And since its introduction, it has killed millions of ash trees in both natural forests and cities. It has proven both very difficult and costly to manage. So just to go over the description of the emerald ash borer here. So it's bright metallic green in color. It's pretty small. It measures approximately 1 centimeter in length and about 3 to 3.5 millimeters wide. It has a flat head and an overall bullet-shaped appearance. And again, as stated previously, it targets all species of ash trees, but here in Canada, the green, red, white, and black ash are most often affected, with blue and pumpkin ash being less common, but they can also be affected as well. So these are just a few different species that we have that are native here that can resemble the emerald ash borer. So just wanted to show this here to show that it is important to know that there are different species of insects that can look similar to the emerald ash borer, but we need to be able to distinguish it from the native species. So if you look at the one that's immediately to the right of the emerald ash borer, the bronze birch, like it looks pretty similar, but the striking difference obviously is that different color. And then to the right of that, the other species that are present, obviously they're different in shape, size, but they all have that bright metallic green color. So it is important to be able to recognize the emerald ash borer as distinctive or as distinct from the native species that are present here as well. So the life cycle of the emerald ash borer, so it begins with the female laying approximately 40 to 70 eggs on the bark of an ash tree. The eggs are typically laid between June and early July, but it can vary depending on climate and other factors. Once they have hatched, the larvae will bore their way into the layers of the tree just beneath the bark to feed, and they remain there for 1 to 2 years, and they then pupate into adults. When the larvae populations become large enough, the feeding under the bark girdles the tree, eventually leading to its death. And at this time of the year, they're likely to be in their pre-pupae stage in preparation to transition into the pupae, and the process of pupation occurs from late April to mid-July. So once they mature into the adult stage, they then chew their way out, leaving that telltale D-shaped hole through the bark, and they begin to emerge late May and early June. And then the adults can fly immediately after emerging, and they'll feed on the ash leaves for the remainder of their lives. They will seek out new trees and begin the process all over again. And on the right side of the screen here, there are just so there's an image of the egg, the larvae, the prepupae, the pupae, and then finally the adult, so that you can see. So this map reflects the distribution of emerald ash borer across North America as of January 2021. I wasn't able to find a comprehensive distribution map that was more recent, but this one here shows the extent of the emerald ash borer's reach. And one thing I wanted to highlight, so there's that red circle. So where I'm situated currently in Sault Ste. Marie, so it's at that the top left-hand corner of that circle. If you see, there's quite a bit of gap between the locations as we head towards southern Ontario. And so it's widely believed that the emerald ash borer was introduced here in Sault Ste. Marie through transported infected ashwood material. And so it's just one thing that I wanted to stress and kind of show with the map here that it's very important to not be moving those wood materials because they're able to spread the emerald ash borer across those great distances. So this is the current map depicting the regulated areas in Canada where the movement of regulated materials is restricted or prohibited by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and phytosanitary regulations must be adhered to. So as of February 26th of this year, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has expanded the regulated areas within the province of Quebec to include new regional county municipalities in both northwestern and the eastern parts of the province there that you can see circled in red. And so how do you know if the emerald ash borer is present in your area? Where there are some common signs and symptoms to look out for. So the most obvious of those will be the crown dieback, including leaf yellowing and branch dieback as well. And it just has an overall appearance of like an unhealthy tree. That'll be the most obvious. So one. So underneath the bark, there will be those characteristic S-shaped galleries, as well as the peeling of the bark themselves, and that's due to the feeding from the larvae. And then once the adults have emerged, they leave that characteristic D-shaped exit hole in the bark, and it's measured between 3.5 to 4 millimeters in width. You may also notice cracks and fissures in the bark of the tree that are caused by the larval feeding as well as they feed through the phloem of the bark or of the tree. Another one will be the epicormic shoots that you can see. So those clusters of new growth that emerge from the trunk of the tree or also from existing branches. And finally, there will also be presence of woodpecker holes as they are trying to feed on the larvae that are underneath the bark. But it's important to not confuse those with the emergence holes that are left behind by the emerging adults, which is highlighted there in the green circle. So some impacts of the emerald ash borer. So we like to highlight the ecological, economic, and social impacts of invasive species. So as far as the ecological impacts go, so there's been a major reduction in native ash tree population, and it has led to alterations in the forest composition. So as the ash trees die, it opens up the canopy and allows more light penetration through to the forest understory, and it promotes the proliferation and ground vegetation, including other invasive species, for example, dog strangling vine and garlic mustard. And also, it also affects the species that rely on ash trees as well. For economics, so the high cost of tree removal and replacements in cities, so it has been very costly for municipalities to manage. And there's also major commercial losses to the forestry sector as well. So ash trees that are used for lumber, pulp, and furniture. And for social, so within like park settings, within cities, for example, they provide a lot of shade, they provide windbreak, and they themselves can also become a hazard. For example, if dead branches are being blown in the wind, they could fall, and that could be hazardous there. And the overall aesthetic value in parks and like recreational spaces is reduced as well. So for management options, so there are 3 main management types that are used here in Canada, chemical, biological, and mechanical. So in Canada, there are a few different types of insecticides that are approved for use in managing emerald ash borer. It is recommended that they be injected into the tree while it is still healthy. Some research suggests that if more than 50% of the canopy has been lost, the tree is likely too far gone, and treatment won't be effective. So the injected insecticides are most effective during sunny days when the trees are actively transpiring and between the months of May and August. For biological management, so there are 3 species of parasitoid wasps from Asia that are currently being used to control the EAB populations. So 2 of these species originate from China and one of them is from Russia. And so these wasps, they'll seek out and they'll use the emerald ash borer as hosts to complete their life cycle. But if suitable hosts aren't found, these wasps will die. And then for mechanical management, this involves the physical removal of the infested trees, with all parts of the tree being either incinerated or burned. For burying, or buried, sorry, incinerated and buried. For burying, the recommended depth of burial is a minimum of 2 meters with immediate soil coverage. And the Canadian Food Inspection Agency does have a guideline of how you're able to actually treat infected ash material to make it able to be used. And so there's things like processing the wood itself. So if you strip down the outermost layer of the tree down to the sapwood to a depth of at least 1 centimeter, you are able to use the wood chips from the ash trees, but they have to be ground and chipped so that they're of a size of no less than 2.5 centimeters in either 2 different dimensions. And there are different things that can be done as well. Those are just some of the guidelines there. So what can you do? So obviously prevention is key. And as Madison had stressed earlier on in the presentation, don't move firewood. So this is going to be repeated a little bit more, but we really need to stress that because it is one of the major vectors of spread for these forest invasives. And so the movement of regulated articles, such as the trees themselves, nursery stock, logs and branches, lumber, wood packaging. So any of those articles should not be moved as well. And so whoops, sorry about that. So the ash trees should be checked regularly, and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency does provide a guideline for surveying. It's available on their website, and we also have it on our species profile for the emerald ash borer on our website as well. It's also recommended that you replant trees that are lost to the emerald ash borer. There is a list on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency's website of suitable replacements for trees that can be replanted. But it's recommended that you take note of the trees that are within the area of the ash trees that have been lost, and to just select a diverse amount of species to plant to replace those ashes. And any of the any sightings of the emerald ash borer can be reported to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and especially if they fall outside of the regulated areas. We can also use EdMaps and iNaturalist as supplemental tools for reporting sightings as well, and to spread the word. So if you let other people know, obviously the more people that are aware of this invasive species, the better it is in reporting and managing. So the next invasive insect that I'm going to cover is the Asian longhorn beetle. So the Asian longhorn beetle is a wood-boring beetle that is also native to Asia, and it is recognized as a pest in some parts of its native range. The beetle was introduced to North America through infested wood packaging material as well, and was first discovered in urban street trees in Brooklyn, New York in 1996. So this insect is a major threat to the hardwood tree species. And here in Ontario, the tree species that the Asian longhorn beetle has been found on, other than the maples, include willows, poplars, and birch. But in the United States, there have been more species that the Asian longhorn beetle has been found on, including elm, hackberry, horse chestnut, ash, and others. And while it is not currently present within Canada, a major invasion by this insect would be detrimental to the hardwood forest industry. So the beetle is currently found in a few different states south of the border in the US, in the states of New York, Massachusetts, Ohio, and Southern Carolina. It was present here, but it has been eradicated from the states of Illinois and New Jersey, and here in Ontario, it was officially declared eradicated in the year 2020. So it was originally discovered in Toronto, in the Toronto area in 2003 and in Mississauga in 2013, but extensive eradication and quarantine efforts led to its successful removal. So the life cycle of the Asian longhorn beetle. So just here on the screen, you can see that there's the 4 different life stages, starting from the egg, going to the larva, the pupa, and then finally to the adult. During this time of the year, the Asian longhorn beetle is likely to be in its larval form until pupation occurs in April or May. All right, so the females will chew small depressions into the bark of the host trees, where they will then lay their eggs. These newer oviposition sites are reddish brown in color and become darker as they age. And the eggs themselves are oval in shape and they're creamy white in color and typically measuring between 5 to 7 millimeters in length. They take about 1 to 2 weeks to hatch. Um, and the eggs then hatch into larvae and begin tunneling into the tree itself and create galleries as they feed on the tree tissue. So the galleries produced from the larval feeding severely disrupts the flow of water and nutrients through the sapwood of the tree. And the larval phase is the longest phase of the insect's life cycle, taking anywhere between 1 to 2 years to fully mature. And once the larvae have fully grown, they will create chambers at the end of their feeding tunnels where they will then pupate. And these chambers are filled with frass, which is the excrement from the insect, and wood shavings. Once in their pupal stage, they will remain there for about 2 to 3 weeks and finally mature into adults. And so the adults will then remain in that pupal chamber for about another 2 weeks or so to allow for their exoskeleton to harden. And once that is complete, they will chew their way out from the tree, creating exit holes as they leave. So the Asian longhorn beetle itself, it's a large, shiny black beetle with irregular white spots all over it. They have very long antennae in relation to the rest of their body with alternating black and white bands. And the antennae themselves, they can be about 1.5 to 2 times longer than the body. So it's quite noticeably longer. So the Asian longhorn beetle are not strong flyers. They're big and heavy beetles, and so they tend to be a bit awkward in flying. So because of this, they tend to reinfest the tree that was their host and stay close by. And just adding to this point, so since they are not strong flyers, it is again just stressing the importance of not moving firewood, but it is the movement of infested firewood and other wood materials that is responsible for their long distance travel. So this image here, we had found on bugwood.org, and it's just an image depicting a neighborhood in the city of Chicago. So these trees here had been infected with the Asian longhorn beetle, and this is just to show the differences from once they are infected to then being removed, so that you can actually see the effect that it has on the residential neighborhood. And this is the aftermath here. So you can see there's quite a change. What was once a street that was lined with a bunch of beautiful trees, uh, now it's just from an aesthetic point of view, it's definitely altered and quite impacted. So what else might you see? So when looking on the different host species of trees that are commonly associated with the Asian longhorn beetle, you'll see external bark cracks on the tree and lifting of the bark or missing bark. You'll often see adults feeding on the tree themselves. They'll also feed on the leaves, the leaf stems, the twigs. You'll also notice sawdust and wood shavings, thinning of the crown and dead branches, as well as the discoloring and falling of the leaves, and a foamy or frothy sap at the beginning or at the recent egg site deposit. So you'll see that little foamy substance there where the adult female has laid their eggs. And important here is to be able to distinguish this from a native species that does look very similar. So here we have the white-spotted Sawyer beetle, and it is the most common look-alike species with the Asian longhorn beetle. But the one obvious sign that is it's easily distinguishable is that white spot at the base of the neck of the white-spotted Sawyer beetle. And as well as there's the bluish white legs on the Asian longhorn beetle that the native white spotted Sawyer beetle doesn't have, and it is smaller overall in size. Another major distinction is that the invasive beetle is associated with hardwood trees, whereas the native beetle is associated with conifers. And so what can we do to prevent the reintroduction of Asian longhorn beetle here in Canada? So it's recommended, obviously, to inspect host trees regularly. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency has survey guidelines if anyone is interested. They're also available on our website as well. And again, to stress the importance of not moving products that could contain hitchhiking insects, such as wood packaging material or firewood. And our call to action here. So report any suspicious sightings to the Canadian Food Inspection Centre, Canadian Food Inspection Agency immediately. Even if you aren't 100% sure, it's always better to submit a report so that it can be reviewed, so that we don't miss any sightings of the Asian longhorn beetle. So then I'm going to move on and just do a very brief talk of the spotted lanternfly. So the spotted lanternfly is an invasive plant hopper originating from southeastern Asia that feeds on over 100 different hosts, including economically important plants such as grapevines and maple trees. So they weaken plants by feeding on the sugars contained within the phloem of the plant. So they use their piercing mouth parts to penetrate the woody tissue. And it is a forestry and agricultural pest. This time of the year, you're likely to see it in its egg mass form. The picture on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen shows the egg mass itself. So the egg masses are easily overlooked. It's important to familiarize yourself with how the egg masses look. So they excrete the sugary substance called honeydew, which coats the plants, sidewalks, and people. And it also attracts other pests and nuisance insects as well. The adults themselves will appear in midsummer, and they're very distinctive in this stage. So you can see the picture on the far right corner. So they're beautifully vibrant and really noticeable. But they're often seen with their wings closed. That's not often how you will see them. There's a picture on the next slide that'll show that a little bit better. But they're most often seen with their wings closed and the black spots present. And we'll go to the next slide to show that. On the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you can see the image of the spotted lanternfly with its wings closed, how it's most often seen. So it was first detected in 2014 in the state of Pennsylvania, where it has since spread to 14 other states. It has caused noticeable economic damage to both the agricultural and forestry sectors in Pennsylvania. The closest known detections are in Buffalo, New York, and in Pontiac, Michigan. So it is not confirmed in Canada, though there have been an increase in public suspect sightings in Ontario. So on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency website, there's actually a list of all the different reports that have been submitted for anyone who's interested. But all of the suspect reports have been followed up to date. And so it has not been confirmed yet in Canada. And the picture there on the side, so that was actually a picture of an interception. So it was an adult that was found under plastic wrap of from a shipment coming into Canada. And it shows how good they are at hitchhiking. So the insects themselves, they're also able to hang on to moving cars. So if you're visiting an infested area in the United States, make sure to check your vehicle and any items that sat outside for a period of time outdoors. Such as camping equipment, for example, to check for egg masses, for nymphs or adults, and before returning to the country. And so one of the things you can do just to make sure that you don't have any of the insects on your vehicle is you can run your vehicle through a high-pressured car wash just for safe measure. The accidental transportation of the egg masses is one of the primary vectors for spread of spotted lanternfly in forestry operations as well. So it's important to inspect both natural and artificial surfaces, such as tree bark, logs, equipment, machinery, and vehicles, and shipping crates and pallets. And so our call to action with the spotted lanternfly. So have you found it? The thing that we always stress is snap it, catch it, and report it. So here in the province in Ontario, the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs conducts annual monitoring for the SLF, particularly high-risk areas with the use of traps like the one that is pictured there in the slide that is placed on the trunk of the tree. And there's also a lot of outreach that is being done to educate the public and different industries about the threat of the spotted lanternfly. And this is done through facilitating in-person workshops, delivering webinars such as this one, and public events such as outdoor recreation shows, as well as social media posts and different media releases that are sent out. So for the snap it, catch it, and report it. So we recommend that you take photos of the specimen and actually collect the specimen. So that can be done using a container for the nymphs or adults, or a plastic bag for the egg masses, which can be scraped off of the surface that they're found on. And then those specimens can be stored in a freezer. So when you are reporting it, it's important to take note of the detailed location that it was found, including GPS coordinates, and if possible, the address or intersection that it was found at, the host plant and the habitat that it was located in, and it can be reported to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency online or over the phone. The spotted lanternfly doesn't bite or sting, so it's perfectly safe to touch and put them into a bag. And I'll hand it back over to Maddie.
Thanks, Vince. I'll try and go through our last 3 slides here quite quickly, just that way we can get to questions if there are any that come in through the Q&A box. So this slide is really just showing the prevention curve. It's showing that prevention is really the most cost-effective solution when managing invasive species. So if a species goes unnoticed or is unmanaged and those population sizes grow, eventually your only solution is really long-term control, and that can be quite costly. So we really try to emphasize the importance of prevention. And we can place the different species we talked about today along this curve. And thankfully, a lot of them really fall within those 3 main categories where there's still hope: prevention, eradication, and containment. So you can go to the next slide. So overall, if you think you've seen oak wilt, hemlock woolly adelgid, Asian longhorn beetle, or spotted lanternfly, please report it to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. They're the main governing bodies that come out and handle these types of high priority species. And like we talked about throughout, a good report includes pictures, location information, site information. Really, the more information you provide, the better. You can also make invasive species reports like beech leaf disease or emerald ash borer to EdMaps iNaturalist or to us at the Invasive Species Centre. EdMaps is a really great tool. It shows all the different public reports. So it's not necessarily an extensive list of where all of an invasive species is found, but it gives you a good idea of where you can maybe start looking to get an idea. And I'll just wrap up here quickly by saying we have a lot of free invasive species resources on our website, species profiles that go in depth on all the species we talked about today and more, fact sheets. We have a webinar series, a training program, and lots of different newsletters. If you're interested, you can sign up on our website. So hopefully we still have some time for questions if you go to our next slide there, Vince. If not, you can also just email us anything you have as well. Feel free to reach out anytime. Always happy to talk about invasive species. And thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Okay, thanks, Madison and Vincent. I guess I have a quick, well, not a quick question, a long question. So as far as if you find something in your woodlot, and let's say you have all of these things, as far as treatment goes for oak wilt, it sounds like removal is the only way. And I've read something that if you have individual trees, you would take that tree out when it's appropriate to do so. And then I've heard about trenching around the root area to stop the root-to-root transmission, right?
Yes, so there are a couple different, so in Canada, we have tree removals and trenching as the approved methods of management. For all the detections that we've had so far, they've been in residential areas. So there wasn't any really need for trenching. All the concrete kind of prevents that natural root grafting, so it wasn't really necessary. But it's definitely an option for more forested areas like woodlots, and when you get more out into the north, for sure. So those would be the main tools. And then in the States, they have additional treatments, but tree removals and trenching is what we would do here in Canada.
Okay, and how do you pronounce that hemlock woolly? Is Adelgid or Adelgid?
There's a lot of different ways. I say Adelgid, like the
Okay.
singer Adele.
And that again is removal pretty much, or insecticide. Sounds
Yeah,
like
It really depends on the level of infestation. There's different recommendations depending on how big or small. There have been some areas like in Hamilton, at like the Royal Botanical Garden site where Hemlock woolly adelgid was recently found. They just started doing treatments. So more people are going to start doing chemical treatments, especially as it becomes more available now that we have more options on the market.
And is that kind of a spray thing?
Yes, 3 of them are injected into the tree, and there are 2 basil bark sprays.
Okay. And then beech leaf sounds like we don't know much about it, but maybe trimming and pruning to let more light in might help. And
It
then,
might help. Yeah, it's hard to give like definitive management strategy recommendations though, unfortunately, but yeah.
the emerald ash borer, I know I'm in Prince Edward County and it's here because I just took down 10 or 12 ash trees because they're
Oh, wow.
dead or dying. Again, it's removal because sounds like there's, well, insecticide, but if you're on a woodlot and you have 200 ash trees, you're not going to insecticide them because it will be too expensive, right? So I guess it's removal or waiting for them to die or whatever.
Yeah, I guess the removal would be the preferred option. But yeah, as I had mentioned in the presentation, there is on the Canadian Food Inspection Agency website, there is a good list of replacement species that they recommend. But yeah, always planting a good diverse amount of species to replace them.
Out for EAB, do we think that at some point, if you're in an area where they're all dead, do we think the EAB will go away and die out and the ash will come back and then it'll be a cyclical thing eventually, or do we know?
That I'm not entirely sure. I know that they don't typically fly really long distances. So yeah, I guess as long as it's not being transported, via firewood or wood product to another woodlot, potentially just in that localized area. But I don't have a definitive answer for that though.
Yeah, I think in general, the idea is that they could come back if they just go where the ash are really. So the recommendation is not to replant ash in the areas where emerald ash borer has been found.
I've
Okay,
got a
then.
quick question about, sorry, Greg, to interject. The infected ash, if you had a portable sawmill, is it unsafe then to use the lumber from that?
It's not that it's unsafe. There are guidelines that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency
Okay.
has to make the wood usable, but you do have to follow those. And I believe that there is
Okay.
permitting that you have to acquire as well.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, an Asian longhorned beetle, as far as eradication or treatment goes, it sounds like it's again taking out the infected trees and spotting it early if you can. And the same with lanternfly, right?
Yeah, exactly. For Asian longhorn beetle, tree removals are really like the key. Like you'll know if you can remove the tree, you're getting rid of the insect. So that's the best eradication strategy for Asian longhorn beetle.
Okay. We got a couple of questions in the Q&A box here. First question is regarding lookalikes to the Asian longhorn beetles. Could pine beetles also, because they be a lookalike because they have very long antennae?
Yeah, for sure. There are a lot of different pine Sawyer beetles that are lookalikes for Asian longhorn beetle. That white spotted pine one is just the most common one that we see, but there are lots of lookalikes for sure.
Okay. And second question is about ash. I know that ash is an important species for the forest product sector, as mentioned, as well as for First Nations who weave black ash to baskets. Do you guys have any hope that any ash in Ontario will survive this epidemic?
I can start off and then you can join in if you want, Vince.
Sure.
I know there have been lingering ash that have been found that have either been able to kind of resist emerald ash borer or can survive longer because of it. So I know there are a lot of different groups looking into these lingering ash and trying to see what makes them different from others and how we can kind of use those to grow new future trees that are more resistant.
Right. I also think it is really important to be optimistic as well. When I was doing a little bit of research, there has been some good successes with the biological control methods with those wasps, and I do think that will prove to be a lot more valuable moving forward in the future. But again, it's hard to say.
I guess it could be like the chestnut thing where people are still experimenting with chestnuts and hoping to bring them back. We may lose a lot of ash, but at some point in the future, we may be able to get them back somehow, right?
Yeah, definitely a lot of seed collection going on, lots of different areas of research. So there's hope.
Okay, so that's it for questions, guys. I appreciate your joining us for this session. I'll remind everybody on the call that we have a second session on May 10th at noon in regards to plants and fungi. And again, if you have a woodlot in our Quinte chapter area and you're interested in hosting a walk on how to deal with invasives, then please email quintewoodlotassociation@gmail.com and let us know. Hey guys, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for participating. Oh, by the way, is this going to be on the invasive species website in case somebody wants to follow up again?
We have recorded it, and so we can send it your way, or we can post it. We'll chat about what's best, but we can definitely make it public.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Yeah,
Thank you
good
so
day,
much.
Greg.
Have a good day.
Good webinar.